I'm Anjanette Levy, and thanks for joining us here on Law and Crime. It's Friday afternoon, and we are having our special lunch hour Q&A, but we have an added bonus for you this Friday. We're going to be taking your questions here for 2 hours. So submit them to us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. And of course, this is all about the YNW Melly trial that's taking place in Broward County, Florida. It's a double murder trial, and Melly, whose legal name is Jamel Demons, faces 2 counts of first-degree murder and the possibility of the death penalty for the October 2018 shooting deaths of his 2 friends, Chris Thomas Jr., who went by YNW Juvie, and Anthony Williams, who went by YNW Sack Chaser. Cortland Henry, who went by YNW Bortland, is a co-conspirator in this case, and he is charged separately and will go to trial at a later date. So as I mentioned, we'll be taking your questions as we always do. We're here for 2 hours and we're really excited about it. Let's check in first with Terry Austin, who is here with us, fresh back from the Broward County Courthouse in Florida. Court is dark on Fridays. Terry, what were your thoughts? You were in the courtroom all week long.
Well, Anjanette, it was riveting. There was a lot going on. Judge Murphy was getting a little bit impatient with both sides. At one point, defense and the prosecution were bickering about documents, and the judge said, look, and he said this to the prosecution, just produce the documents, because earlier the prosecution was sanctioned because she failed to produce some documents. So I think there's a lot of tension between the attorneys, and frankly, the judge is just ready to get this trial moving. The witnesses were also very interesting. We had someone who was talking about the cell phone data on cross-examination. The defense was very good at showing basically there's no way to pinpoint anyone's phone in the car. It could have been on the ground, it could have been on the forest, and it was such a general area, and there's a lot of discretion as far as the distance where you cannot specifically pinpoint that. We also had someone who testified about the DNA, and Anjanette, this was extremely interesting because Melly's DNA was not on any of the items, and there were a number of items in that car, including Gatorade bottles. There were sneakers in the car. There were samples taken from a T-shirt. He was not found on anything except the rear driver's door handle. And the interesting point about that is initially his DNA was not on that either, but a second follow-up just weeks ago showed that his DNA was there. So that was a little suspect, and it was a little interesting that it was only years after that they asked for this second follow-up on the DNA, and that's the only place where they found Melly's DNA. So I think some very interesting moments both on the witness stand and between the attorneys. The jury was paying very close attention. No one was asleep. Everyone was leaning up in their chair, even for the information that was a little bit tedious. And by the way, I must say, Melly paid close attention as well.
Oh, I'm sure he did, because literally his life is on the line. He faces the possibility of the death penalty. We've been telling everybody that since we started covering this case, and there's a lower threshold for that now in the state of Florida because of a new law signed just in April by Governor Ron DeSantis. The vote for a death penalty verdict now has to just be 8-4 instead of 12-0, the unanimous verdict that they used to have to impose the death penalty. Let's start taking some questions. Also with Terry and I today, Michael Bryant, an attorney and host here at the Law and Crime Network, and Bradford Cohen, who actually represented YNW Melly in this case a while back, no longer does. So thanks to everybody for being with us today. Our first question comes from Kayla Davis, 1919 from YouTube. How many jurors, I just kind of addressed that, have to agree guilty for him to get death, or will that be up to the judge? Just wondering about the death sentence. So Kayla, it's 8-4 under that new threshold, and that's only if he's convicted and the jury finds that. Let's get to our next question. Dara Lest, I should say, on Twitter. Why didn't Melly have the option to be on house arrest / bond when he got locked up for this back in 2018? So Bradford, I feel like that's a question for you. Why didn't he get to be on house arrest?
In these type of cases, the judge holds a hearing, an Arthur hearing, essentially because there's no guarantee to bond on this type of case. So they would hold an Arthur hearing to find a proof evident presumption great, meaning if the state has enough to say that proof evident, which is lower than beyond a reasonable doubt, obviously, or presumption great. So he would hold that Arthur hearing. That Arthur hearing, he would make a finding of that. Even if he found that proof evident and presumption great was there, the judge could then use his discretion whether or not to give that individual bond, depending on the prior record, depending on what the accusations are in the case. And he would look at whether or not he was a flight risk, whether or not he was a harm to society or potential harm to society. And he would look at all those things and then weigh those things against whether or not they should hold him in custody. In this case, the judge felt that he should hold him in custody instead of giving him a bond or house arrest. In Cortland's case, Cortland Henry, who's the co-defendant, because he wasn't being accused of being the actual shooter, he was given a bond with house arrest, and I think he's been on house arrest since the incident occurred.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Let's get to our next question. Jemiah Mendez from Facebook. Michael Bryant, at what point will we get evidence that means something? In other words, smoking gun evidence. You know, I'm thinking this is a circumstantial case. We don't often have smoking guns.
We don't have any gun in this case,
right, exactly.
Smoking or otherwise. You know, that's if everyone is asking that question, and believe me, it's not the first time it's been asked, that's a problem for the prosecution because we are waiting. We are at least halfway through their case, maybe 2/3, and we're still waiting for something that puts the weapon, at least theoretically, in the hand of Jamel Demons. I think there's some question whether we put him in the car at the time of the shooting, whether that was a drive-by, as they suggest on the defense, or whether it was shooting from inside the vehicle. We know from video that he got in the car at some point, which doesn't surprise me. His DNA might be somewhere near the car. It was that whole thing that unfolded last week when we were on the air live, and you know, they found his DNA only after they went to a higher up in the Miramar Police Department and they gave it another look. You know, that was bizarre. That was just 3 weeks before trial. So they had to work hard to find DNA to put him on or near the vehicle. You know, that's a far cry from being the guy in the car shooting the gun.
It's sure interesting to me that they went back and looked over the car again. So they must have felt like we need more. I mean, that's the only reason you would do that. At Ryan Barlson from Twitter, Terry, what does the gang's expert testimony mean, or the gang expert's testimony mean for Melly?
Well, the gang expert was trying to give the jury a little bit of background about gangs and the signals they use and how they incorporate what they're doing in their music and what they do on the street. And then during the direct examination, the prosecutor was trying to tie in what Melly was doing, and the gang expert was trying to basically say that some of the signals that Melly used was related to the gang. He's trying to say he's part of the Bloods, the fact that they changed the name out for C's and B's. But I don't think that that expert really put Melly in the gang. The prosecution wants to make sure that this is gang related because that is one of the aggravating factors for that death penalty. So that's why that expert was on the stand. Based on what I saw, I don't think there was enough of a connection, although I will say I was watching the poll, and after the expert was on the stand talking about the gang, it did go up a little bit as far as maybe Melly was guilty. So I think that gang affiliation might have done something as far as swaying some people's opinions, at least
well,
for
I feel
our
like
viewers.
we've got somebody here. Terry, who can answer the question for us. You know, Bradford, you were his lawyer. Christine Bradley, the assistant state attorney, says that he, at the time of these homicides, she said it in her opening statement, was doing this whole loyalty oath and learning about it for the G Shine Blood set. So is your former client a member of the Bloods? Is he a gang member?
I think that the angle that the state is taking is to throw, and they often do this, is to throw as much mud as they can towards the defendant and try and dirty them up as much as they can. And that shows to me an act of desperation. And it also shows that, you know, it's time to see the real evidence in the case. The real evidence they presented so far is telephone evidence. And that telephone evidence was very weak because they can't say whether or not the individual was in the car. They can't say whether Mr. Demons ever pulled the trigger. They don't have a gun. They have no DNA. They have no gunshot residue on Mr. Demons. So the holes in this case, to me, and especially when I first got the case, I thought the holes were insurmountable for the state. Now, a case is like, I always compare a case to 12 rounds of a boxing match. The first 3 rounds could go to one guy, and then all of a sudden the other guy comes on very strong. In this case, who's ahead on the card is definitely the defense, because they still haven't addressed the biggest holes in the case. They keep dancing around that bush. They keep dancing around those facts about actually putting him in the car at the time of the shooting. But sooner or later, they're going to have to address that. They can put people on the stand. And in this case, the gang expert, who I'm familiar with because I've handled a lot of cases concerning gangs, and I'm familiar with them. And I think it was a big misstep on behalf of the state to have him wear a mask. I understand why he needs to wear the mask, or why he is apprehensible about revealing his face because there's so many cameras in the courtroom. But I think the jury does not like that. Juries like transparency. Juries like the putting forward the idea of justice, right? So when a guy takes the stand and has a mask on that kind of looks like a robbery mask, has this mask on, it doesn't make a jury feel good. And that's why you saw those questions from the jury. Hey, can he take off his mask? I feel a certain way. Those are all going to be appellate issues, by the way, if he loses.
Right.
And I can't see why they would have done that. I wouldn't have done that. I would have set up a screen, or I would have done something else to where he could address the jury but still be blocked from the pews.
Well, he said he has a bounty on his head, Danny Polo, and he has testified in other cases with that mask on. But Bradford, you know, briefly, just yes or no, was Melly a gang member at the time that this happened?
Oh, I have no idea. I mean, first of all, anything that Melly would have told me would have been attorney-client privilege. That's number one. And number two is I have no idea if he is or if he's not. We didn't even start researching that because we thought it was such a non-issue.
Okay, great. Well, we're going to take a quick break, everybody. Stay with us. Keep the questions coming to us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. We'll get to as many of them as we can. I'm Anjanette Levy, and you're watching Law and Crime. We'll be right back.